Hello, I'm Alessandra Kelley, professional fine artist and sentimental journeyman. Everything humans do is art, so we might as well learn to do it with gusto. I love the science and art of mixing colors. Sometimes you can get dramatic and useful results with very simple ingredients. Bright green is one of those funny colors. Historically, it was hard to come by. Before phthalocyanine green hit the market in 1938, all the really bright green pigments were some combination of lethal, weak, corrosive, or fugitive. Not an ideal situation. Of course, you can mix greens if you have a bright yellow and, well, a blue. But back before artificial ultramarine was introduced, blue pigments were as rare and as problematic as green ones. Fortunately, some clever person figured out a way to make green without green or blue pigment, and I lucked into it at a young age. As a kid, I lived, briefly, in a Scandinavian community, where in Girl Scouts I learned basic traditional rosemaling, a Norwegian art of decorative floral painting. And in that nostalgic, folksy, bicentennial, backwards-looking activity, I learned one of the deep secrets of color mixing. Yellow plus black equals green. Start with a bright enough yellow, put it next to a lime, and you can see it's a similar color. Put it next to what's called lime green these days, and it looks a little dull and earthy. But, and this is important, you make art using what works in context. And in context, when this green is next to a red or something naturally colored, basically, when it's not next to one of those artificial super bright greens, it looks plenty bright enough. It's great for foliage and goblin skin and dragons. To make this green, start with a bright lemon yellow paint. In this case, I'm using Golden Matte Fluid Acrylics Hansa Yellow Opaque. The color name varies from one maker to another. The color index number is PY74, or Pigment Yellow 74. If you see that on the label, you'll know you're using paint with the same pigment I am here. It helps to use a more opaque yellow, especially if you plan to layer on lights later. Just as a quick note, this is my homemade version of a wet palette. It's a small plastic dessert plate with a folded wet paper towel and a square of parchment paper as the actual palette. Another dessert plate simply inverted and set on top is enough to keep the whole thing damp overnight, or even for several days. The black I'm using is Liquitex Acrylic Gouache Mars Black, PBK11, or Pigment Black 11, one of the iron oxide family of pigments. Just about any black I've tried works for this, although you'll get slightly different results with different pigments. I start by pulling a good bit of yellow between the colors on the palette. Notice I'm taking only a tiny amount of black on the tip of my brush. You really don't need much. Okay, watch this. The black is pretty strong, so at first it just looks black. But look what happens as I work in more yellow. I don't know about you, but to me the color always looks like a grubby, dirty yellow until at some point near the yellow when it suddenly appears as green, and the greenness kind of rolls back visually, so now I can see the darker shades as green too. That's how it looks to me anyway. It's pretty cool. See, look at that. That is undeniably a brilliant spring green. Add more yellow, and you've got a great highlight color that stays intense without going pale and seafoamy. Add more black and you've got a deep green shadow. Let's look at some stuff I've painted using this mix. This is Reaper Miniatures 50212, Incredible Woman, a sort of generic muscular woman superhero. I love this figure. I don't know, want to paint her up like all the superheroes. This time I painted her like Marvel's She-Hulk in her Fantastic Four uniform from the classic 1980s storyline. All of the greens you see here, her skin and hair and eyes, are this mix of yellow and black, with highlights going up to pure yellow and shadows going down to pure black. And here's a cartoonish little goblin pirate from the Pontoonier Miniatures set EMG P009, Goblin Pirates with Sword and Pistol. If you start with a less bright yellow, you'll get something more like khaki or a dull olive green, good for military camo. These are paints made from 3 different yellow pigments, all from Golden Paints. Raw sienna is a natural yellowish iron oxide earth pigment. It makes a very dull khaki. Yellow ochre is another natural yellow iron oxide pigment. Technically, it's classified as the same pigment as this raw sienna, PY43. Practically speaking, yellow ochres tend to be lighter, yellower, and a bit more opaque, while raw siennas tend to be darker, browner, and a little more transparent. The yellow ochre mix is noticeably olive green in the middle. And this is the Hansa Yellow Opaque we used earlier. I'm mixing it up again next to the other 2 yellows so you can see how very green it gets by comparison. Here's a quick little paint card I made for reference to hang around the studio. Sometimes I make big, fancy, permanent paint test boards that I hang on to for years. And then again, sometimes I just throw some paint on a 3x5 card to see how it looks, like this one. I painted it just quickly with color ranges using the 3 yellows I just showed you. Here's another one you saw before, some of the Hansa yellow and black on a 3x5 card to compare to limes and other things. It's just useful to have around to hold up to paintings and objects to compare colors. Testing paints out on paper is a fine way to play with effects and colors, and that's a good thing. Play and experimentation is important. I strongly recommend taking a hands-on approach, seeing what happens when you mix things together. This mix is easy to try, and you can see if you like it. I use this mixed green for all kinds of grassy bases and foliage, for bright green skin when I'm not trying for plausible realism, and for dragons, lizards, frogs, and snakes when I want a natural green that skews warm. The khaki greens mixed from duller yellows make for good military uniforms and vehicle camouflage, anywhere you want a dull, dusty, natural-looking green. Yellow plus black isn't anything you might expect to produce a bright green, but it does. Fun, unexpected results like this are one of the reasons we play with art and art-making materials, to see what new or old techniques we can incorporate and make use of. So yeah.